Hey, it's Arvid, and this is the Bootstrapped Founder. Today, we will talk about the pros and cons of being early in the market or building a competing alternative within an existing one, and what that might mean for the complexity of your product. This episode is sponsored by Paddle.com, my merchant of record payment provider of choice, who has been helping me to focus on Podscan from day one. They're taking care of all the things related to money so that founders like me and you can focus on building the things that only we can build. Paddle handles the rest, things like sales tax and credit cards failing, all of that. They do it so I don't have to. Highly recommend it. So please go and check out Paddle.com. Now, here's a story that I think every founder needs to hear, because it reveals something quite fundamental about markets and competition and the hidden costs of being first. In the world of Python programming, there has been a tool called pip, or PIP, that has dominated package installation for years, decades even. It has been the de facto way to install Python packages through all the many different versions of Python that have existed in the past. And it worked. It solved the problem, and it became quite ubiquitous. You have similar tools in other spaces like NPM for JavaScript or Composer for PHP, but I'm going to talk about something in the Python world today. Because recently, a new competitor tool kind of emerged, and it's called UV, just those two letters. UV is what I believe to be a re-implementation of that same installer. But here's the kicker. It is so much faster than the original that people often run it and they think it didn't work because it's so fast. They're so used to pip taking a lot of time, maybe going to grab a coffee while packages install, that with UV, they blink and it's done. The speed difference is that dramatic with this kind of tool. So if you're using Python, you really should look into this. But even if you're not, I think there's something to learn about it here. UV probably would never exist if it hadn't been for the many, many years of pip being used, being built, and growing into the tool that it became. And I think there's the story here, a learning that goes way beyond Python tooling. When you're building the very first solution of anything in a certain space, you face what I call unavoidable complexity. You're not just building something complex because you want it to be complex. You're building it in the complex way because you simply don't know what you don't know. You don't know what easy looks like. You don't know what simple looks like. You just know what you need to do to get anywhere. Think about it. When people set out to build pip, they didn't know about the complexity of cloud systems or the intricate challenges of interoperability between different Python versions or the nightmare of managing packages across different environments and repositories. The tool was made to fit a world that didn't yet have these things in it. And as these challenges appeared over time, pip was adapted. It was improved. New features were bolted on, and edge cases were handled. Workarounds were created. And through the sheer necessity of being an ongoing experiment, this ongoing learning journey, pip developers just added layers of complexity and interconnectedness to a tool because they were needed. And this happens because when you're the first and only tool that has to fit all these use cases, every new problem becomes your problem to solve. One part of your tool solves one particular problem for one kind of person, and another part solves a different problem for another kind of person. And the moment these parts interact, now there's a third condition that you've never thought about. If you don't solve for it, your tool becomes unusable for people who need both capabilities, or even the ones who just need one of them because you don't know about hidden interplays there. Here's where it gets really interesting. If you build a product for innovators, for people who are willing to experiment, their feedback comes from a very specific perspective. They're thinking, okay, it's fine if it doesn't work perfectly as long as it works at all. They'll tolerate certain drawbacks and sluggishness and incompleteness if your solution still beats the status quo of having to build all of this themselves. The feedback you get from innovators will always be biased towards solving individual use cases perfectly, rather than finding this kind of more generalized solution that works adequately, well enough, 80-20, for everyone. And this is exactly what happened with pip over the years. But now, enter UV, right? UV does something fascinating. It reinvents the wheel, but it reinvents the wheel as seen by the majority of people who actually use it. UV is focused on what it already knows to be this hard stuff, the hard parts of the product. It takes the most painful aspects of package management that pip users have complained about for years, and it solves them extremely well. And so fast that people think it made a mistake. All those learnings from pip's journey, the complexity, the edge cases, the performance bottlenecks, all these things that people only discovered over years of using this tool, they weren't necessarily encoded in pip's code, but they were encoded in the documentation, in the community conversations, the discussions, the Stack Overflow posts, in the lived experience of millions of developers who use that tool. So UV's builders had access to all of that institutional knowledge from day one. They could look at pip and say, well, okay, here's what works really well, we'll keep that. And here's what everybody complains about, we'll just solve this better, because we can. They didn't have to discover these problems through this painful trial and error like pip did over decades. The market had already done that expensive learning for them. So here's what that means for you as a founder. If you're building a tool for the very first time in a fresh market that doesn't have a solution yet, just be aware you will build complexity simply because there's no way for you to know where the avoidable complexity lies. You have unavoidable complexity in these systems because to avoid complexity, you need to be aware of it first. Obviously, it's an unknown unknown that often manifests as technical debt long after the fact. Your future competitors will know this, and they will find the things you do really well and take them. They'll find the things you don't do well at all and build them better. That's just what competition is. That's how markets evolve. That's how tools like this evolve over time, or any software does. But here's the flip side. If you're a founder building something in an existing market, or a red ocean as people call it, you can use this pattern to your advantage because you already know that there are things your incumbent competitors could not have avoided simply by the logic of them not being able to see the problems before they were built, right? Before they ran into them. And this still requires tremendous insight into the market that you're operating in. If you're choosing to go that route, it still requires the capacity to actually come up with a better solution that beats many years of experience building these solutions in that field that your competitors have. But the benefit of not being first is that you get to build the UV that defeats the pip. You get to build a tool that has community learnings and industry best practices built in from day one, even in the architecture and infrastructure of the tool, that the other companies could never have built like this because they had to kind of experiment and fail their way towards that learning. And those are advantages that the original tools can only integrate slowly after the fact, with lots of refactoring and rebuilding and very expensive experimentation. Now, you might think from all of this that this means first movers are doomed, but that's not quite right either. Here's why pip is still on so many systems despite UV being clearly superior in many ways. Legacy and dependencies. The systems running pip right now weren't setting up from scratch yesterday, right? They're not completely novel installations running on the latest version of everything. They have dependencies, both in software and in operational terms. They have other tools that depend on being installed via pip. And they have tool chains that would be hard to change because they're kind of deployed on legacy systems that might struggle with UV, or even just installing a new package like this, or where something is baked in or pre-compiled. There's a lot of legacy stuff, and a lot of it is weirdly integrated. In many ways, this complexity that seemed like a burden, well, it becomes a moat. Your moat is having all those learnings encoded into your product and its integrations. And even though it might be sluggish, even though it might be complicated, the solution is already there and it's being used and it's usable right now. People on the innovator and early adopter end of the spectrum will always try out new things like UV. You can reliably assume that. They will see if it works for them. But UV only has a couple of years worth of documentation and community knowledge, if at all. It's pretty fresh. There may not be as much real-world experience with edge cases, and it may not be completely capable of being deployed on certain systems that people know they need to work with and they need to have work reliably. And this is the Lindy effect in action here. Something that's been around for a while is likely going to stick around for a while longer, and new things, hype cycles, right? They might come and go, and then you're left with something that is unsupported. So what's the lesson here? If you're building something completely new, there's unavoidable complexity. Don't beat yourself up about it. It's the price of being first. But Do prepare for competitors who will learn from your struggles and build cleaner solutions than you can ever build on top of the legacy thing you've already built. Your defense is not to prevent complexity. It is to move fast enough and build deep enough relationships with the users that by the time a cleaner competitor arrives, you've become infrastructure that's hard to replace. It's kind of a version of vendor lock-in, but it comes almost from an operational standpoint, not from we've been paying for this forever, we have integrated it forever. It's like, we're used to this. We operate more effectively with this. A new thing might need changes that we're not willing to pay for. If you're building a solution that is not the first one, but it's replacing an existing tool, you also have an incredible opportunity here. You get to find the avoidable complexity in existing solutions and then eliminate it. You get to learn from years or decades even of other people's expensive mistakes. And you also need to understand why that complexity exists. Sometimes it's solving real problems that aren't immediately obvious and might still be hard to solve. The markets teach us everything we need to know, but they also teach the first movers through painful experience, and it teaches the followers through observation. Both paths have their advantages, but only if you understand which game you're playing. So whether you're building the next pip or the next UV, the key is recognizing that complexity isn't always a flaw. Sometimes it's a feature that's been battle tested by reality. And sometimes the cleanest solution wins not because it's simpler, but because it's simpler in all the right ways for the right people. That's the hidden cost and hidden benefit of being first. You pay for the market's education, but you also get to keep some of the value that education creates in that market. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening to the Bootstrapped Founder. You can find me on Twitter at Avidkal, ARVIDKAHL. If you want to support me and this show, please share Podscan.fm, my SaaS business, with your professional peers and those who you think will benefit from tracking mentions of podcasts, of their names, their brands, and all kinds of things on podcasts out there. Podscan is a near real-time podcast database with a stellar API, many really cool APIs. So please share the word with those who need to stay on top of the podcast ecosystem. Thanks so much for listening. Have a wonderful day and bye-bye.